Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Nathan Sorensen, and I am the Strategic IT Procurement Officer for the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. Today, we are featuring our cloud services offering with Campus EAI. Although we originally advertised an overview of hosting and disaster recovery, the focus today will be on cloud hosting options only. We'll look for a future date to present the disaster recovery and get that calendar invite out to you. Our guest speaker today is Peesh Chopra with Campus EAI, and he will be sharing several case studies on how institutions are using cloud hosting. This webinar is being recorded and will be available shortly after today's presentation. We encourage you to ask questions using the chat feature throughout the presentation. Campus EAI Cloud Services offering we have with the Midwestern Higher Education Compact, and then turning it over to Peesh to give an overview of Campus EAI's Campus Cloud. The Midwestern Higher Education Compact is one of 4 compacts nationally, each having their own niche for addressing issues and advocating for higher education. Often referred to as MEC, our niche has been in cost savings programs, created by and supported by stakeholders from the 12 Midwestern states. As you can see, our sister compacts to the west is the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. To the south, we have the Southern Regional Education Board and the New England Board of Higher Education. And it's important to recognize that 3 states do not participate in any of these compacts, and that includes New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. But what makes the compact unique to higher education community is its broad contracting authority created in each of its member states. The compact is not a group purchasing organization. The compact is a means for stakeholders in the 12 member states to collaborate on identifying regional issues and committing resources to leverage a solution through the compact's statutory authority. All the committees are volunteers who are experts in their respective areas of interest. MEC has several contracts in computer, software, security, event management, and with our cloud services offering. We have a dedicated website that provides information on all of our contracts. But what I want to highlight today is our MEC Cloud Services contract. It was a competitively bid RFP for cloud services in June of 2012. The selection committee awarded the contract to Campus EAI on December 2012, primarily for storage, virtual machine hosting, and web hosting. The contract is effective from December 2012 to November 30th, 2015, with an option to renew the contract up to 4 times in 1-year increments. Entity purchasing agent, the compact provides alternatives to conducting an RFP or utilizing a contract vehicle more suitable for an executive branch of government. All of our contracts are posted to the website, and we have resources you can reach out with additional questions. So who is eligible to use the Campus EAI contract? Higher education, both public and private, not-for-profit, are eligible to use our contracts, not in just the Midwestern Higher Education Compact's member states, but also with our sister compact to the west. Here's an example of our dedicated resources available to you on our mectech.org website. Here we have a brief overview of the Campus EAI contract offering with links to contacts at both MEC and at Campus EAI. Like I mentioned, we also provide the fully executed contracts for your review, and they're available in our contract section of our website. And something important to note, to the right-hand side of of the screenshot, we have the state statutes that specifically name the Midwestern Higher Education Compact and its contracting authority. This is always handy when you're working with your business office. So we want to turn things over to Peach and Campus EAI. I included some contact information for myself, our General Counsel, Rob Trimbrath, and Mary Robertson, our Director of Communications and Marketing. So please don't hesitate to contact our staff. And now I would like to turn it over to Peach and Campus EAI, and please submit questions as the presentation continues.
Thank you, Nathan. I hope that everyone can hear me okay. Just down in Tampa, and it's a beautiful day here. The core of what I will be covering will include an overview of CampusCloud and various configurations or usage scenarios of the cloud, and more specifically CampusCloud. So it should give you an idea of what other institutions are doing as it relates to the cloud and the CampusCloud infrastructure. So just as a way of describing CampusCloud, the organization is sponsored by the Campus EAI Consortium. The Campus EAI Consortium has over 1,800 members in more than 12 countries. And sponsored by, what that means is it's funded by the Campus EAI Consortium as it relates to the capital infrastructure that includes the various data centers and the personnel that comprise of the CampusCloud operations. The organization specifically in terms of CampusCloud focuses on hosting and disaster recovery. So that's sort of its mission, and then all of its users or clients, or what we call members, are primarily from higher ed, and then there are K-12 participants as well. There are roughly in the order of magnitude of about 400 institutions that are utilizing CampusCloud. So that's sort of the the context on CampusCloud. These slides are oriented towards higher ed, but this will give you an idea of the types of institutions that are utilizing CampusCloud, and we've broken them down by the ERP system. It doesn't mean that these institutions are hosting their ERP system in CampusCloud. It's just a way that we've broken down the participants so that it makes some sense in terms of the types of institutions that are involved with this initiative. That also doesn't mean that these institutions, some of them are hosting their ERP system, and we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. So we have institutions, again, ranging from banner shops to colleague and Power Campus shops, and then PeopleSoft, Genzabar, and institutions who have homegrown ERP and student information systems that are utilizing CampusCloud. Now, I do want to point out a couple of things. First of all, CampusCloud has worked with Ellucian to host colleague for institutions like Piedmont College, and Ellucian is aware and has been involved with the hosting of Our Lady of Our Lake College. That's a really, really big statement, because otherwise Ellucian has been not allowing anybody to host their products other than themselves, for business reasons, but also for reasons related to quality. Meaning, if the hoster doesn't do a good job with hosting, let's say, Colleague, Ellucian could presumably look bad for being associated with that service delivery. So that's a very big accomplishment. The second important note is that all Genzabar hosting, in fact, the Genzabar Cloud is really just another brand name for Campus Cloud. That means when Genzabar takes over hosting for any of its products, or through its managed services team moves an entire institution's IT infrastructure to the cloud, that is all being done by Campus Cloud behind the scenes. So this is another key partner to to Campus Cloud, because Genzabar represents about 600 institutions, for example. So just to cover, Campus Cloud itself, the primary data centers for Campus Cloud are located in Cleveland and Denver, and then we also use Phoenix and Charlotte as secondary data centers in the United States. These data centers look like the images on the left of your screen. This is screen grabs or screenshots from the Cleveland facility. So if you've ever seen a sort of commercial Tier 4 data center, this is sort of the environment from a infrastructure standpoint and power standpoint, and cooling and fire suppression and such that makes up the Campus Cloud facilities. The facilities and the infrastructure also run on PCI and SSAE 16 Type 2 certified processes. From an infrastructure or compute standpoint, we are connected into both Internet 2 and National Lambda Rail, which then likely peer into your state research education networks. Like in Ohio, for example, we use ORNet. We peer into National Lambda Rail through one community. We peer into Internet 2 through ORNet. The networking is all Cisco Nexus BGP. We also connect into WANs like AT&T and Level 3. The core of the compute is Cisco UCS. We run super high density chassis running more than 500 gigs of RAM per blade. The compute is connected back into storage area networks, which historically have been NetApp, and now we are utilizing Nimble due to some of the technology innovations that Nimble has brought to market. We are running backup using Symantec for both tape and disk. We are snapshotting NetApp, and the hypervisor, our primary hypervisor, although we support other hypervisors, is VMware. But again, true backup is done using Symantec for retention, because we have many different applications in Campus Cloud, ranging from mail to ERP, which have different retention policies, also broken down by regulatory requirements. The Campus Cloud environment is supplemented with monitoring, and that monitoring is done from more than 12 locations, both from within the United States, like San Francisco, New York, but also out in places like London and Sydney, Australia. So this is kind of a high level of what comprises of, or Campus Cloud is comprised of behind the scenes. Now, from an end user perspective, or from an institution standpoint, you have direct access to our monitoring infrastructure. So, for example, there is a console. We use Xenos behind the scenes. So you have access to our monitoring environment. And from there, you are able to have insight into the status of your, of your services. Now, this monitoring operation consists of more than 20 full-time staff that work for Campus Cloud. Some institutions have leveraged this monitoring operation to monitor their on-premise network equipment and enterprise apps and associated servers, storage, and backup because they don't have a NOC and they don't have the capability to hire 20-plus people. So for the cloud NOC to add a few hundred or a few thousand additional devices and monitor them is not a big additional overhead, and therefore, because the cost has already been absorbed by Campus Cloud, to extend monitoring an additional 100 or 200 devices for you is a very nominal cost. So that is monitoring. One of the cool things that I like about monitoring is that we can not only monitor the normal things like RAM, CPU, and such, but we can also monitor things like how long does it take a user to log into the student information system or into the portal and then perform a function and then log out, so that everything may look good on the normal RAM and CPU, but if it's taking 18 seconds for the user to perform a function, that should be considered a threshold breach, and therefore maybe outage P1 processes should be initiated. So that's one view of Campus Cloud. Another view of Campus Cloud that you have access to is the ability to spin up machines, to change the configuration on machines, spin down machines. So the ability to self-service, essentially the cloud is, it's kind of expected. We also have the capability to do this via a mobile app, but in all reality, not many institutions are really doing this slick fanciness, because most institutions want RDP or they want SSH access to their service if they're managing the application themselves. And if they're not managing the application themselves, meaning they've delegated the management of that application to Campus Cloud, then they're just in the application as an administrator or an end user role, for example. So we have really cool capabilities around Campus Cloud like this, like the ability to charge by the second or by the minute, but nobody wants that either in higher ed, because budgets aren't really variable. Budgets are pretty fixed for the year or for the month. So typically we see fairly static business models, meaning, this is the cost per month, here's a RAM, CPU, and storage. We do see some interesting dynamic compute scenarios where, we don't need all this infrastructure for the whole year, we just need it for like registration and add drop. And that example is cool, but all applications can't support the dynamic compute capability, meaning, for example, some applications leverage a JVM if they're a Java application, for example, and it would take some time for essentially the hypervisor to react in terms of to allocate memory, which really results in the application being slow to the first 50 users, for example, and then the application might speed up. So the theory of sort of elasticity and dynamic compute is only as good as the application is ready to handle that, from a, let's say, from a VMware perspective. But that example is really good in terms of that's a good example where if an application supports dynamic compute, then not having a huge infrastructure for the whole year is much more cost-effective. So that's just sort of a best practice or insight into what's really going on and how are people really using Campus Cloud. And I'm going to switch gears to some actual scenarios so you get a feel for what's happening. This first scenario is Florida State. So with Florida State, they have a multi-node load-balanced environment. They have in excess of 9 machines, virtual machines in Campus Cloud. And these virtual machines are doing things including identity management. If you go to Florida State's public website and you click on My FSU, My FSU is running in Campus Cloud. They have their content management and targeted alerts environment running in Campus Cloud. And it's all running within VMware and within a MySQL and Tomcat context. So this is what Florida State is utilizing Campus Cloud for. And they have delegated the responsibility for all of the upgrades, the maintenance, the application management to the Campus Cloud operation. And in exchange, Campus Cloud prohibits Florida State from accessing the infrastructure, the database, and the web server, because if they were allowed to do that, then Campus Cloud wouldn't be able to provide an SLA on the application and the hosting infrastructure. So in this case, although Florida State is very, very tech savvy, they don't stick their fingers into the infrastructure because they want that SLA. So they run and utilize all of these applications as an admin, and of course their 50,000 plus FTE utilize the various applications that are served up by Campus Cloud, like single sign-on, like MyFSU, for example. So that's the example of Florida State. And obviously the big achievement of Florida State is just the sheer size. So this infrastructure is sized to handle 7,000 logins simultaneously over a ramp-up period of 15 minutes, which is the use case for PeopleSoft add drop. So that's the big use case. And not too different than FSU is LSU. Almost the same exact strategy in terms of what they're utilizing Campus Cloud for, where again they have delegated the application management to Campus Cloud for almost the same set of priorities. So if you go to lsu.edu and on the top you click mylsu.edu, all of LSU's single sign-on services, targeted messaging, application, portal are all running within Campus Cloud. And this is, the second slide is just a sort of diagrammatic representation, roughly a logical diagram of what's going on within LSU. Now what's interesting is that these applications, like the LSU application, is connecting back to LSU's local CAS services. Same with Florida State. So for authentication into MyFSU, the MyFSU application is basically connecting back into FSU's locally clustered CAS infrastructure. For both of these institutions, that architecture is the same. Now, for Ball State, they're also doing exactly the same as Florida State and Louisiana State, except their CAS infrastructure, in addition to the stuff that LSU and FSU are doing with Campus Cloud, is also in Campus Cloud. And above and beyond that, Ball State also is running their mobile app, which is published across iOS and Android devices. You can download it from the app stores. That app is also running in terms of its backend in CampusCloud. So Ball State is slightly smaller than LSU and FSU, but in terms of what they're doing with CampusCloud, they're a little bit further ahead insofar as, in addition to single sign-on, their portal, their targeted alerts application, they're also doing CAS, and they're also doing mobile. And again, very similar to LSU, this is the architecture. All of these architectures so far are running across a load balancer for throughput, but also for availability, right? Meaning in case an app server or web server goes down, or a database server goes down, or the CAS server goes down. There's multiple nodes. Now, an interesting example from within your states is University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Now, as opposed to the three previous institutions, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee is doing all the application management themselves. So we really have no idea what applications are being run, but we do know that the applications are running on a LAMP architecture, which presumably is a PHP or Java application. But at the end of the day, this institution is basically handling the application management function themselves. So they have direct, let's say, SSH access into the machine and can do whatever they want. And CampusCloud is providing 100% uptime commitment, at least up to the hypervisor level, meaning up to the operating system level, which in this case is Linux. So again, in this example, the institution wanted more control and flexibility and wanted more accountability for stuff above the hosting or cloud computing environment. So this is an example of the flexibility of CampusCloud, meaning where it can extend your staff, which were the first three examples. In this example, it's extending the infrastructure of University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, but the staff is from University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, right? At least at the application level. And this is an example, architectural example of what's being used, by this institution. Now, New Mexico State is identical to Ball State, meaning there are no differences, except New Mexico State is a little bit larger than Ball State, but again, the exact same application context, meaning multiple applications, multiple machines within the CampusCloud environment. This is now a very different example. These are examples where Naropa University is a client of Genzabar. They're utilizing Genzabar Cloud, which means they're utilizing CampusCloud. And within Genzabar Cloud or CampusCloud, the core is, in terms of the summary, is everything that Naropa is doing, whether it's their public website, Exchange, Active Directory, Genzabar CX in their case, their Cognos Business Intelligence, their JICS portal, and other applications are all running in CampusCloud. So this institution is not like any of the previous ones. This institution is running almost all of IT with 2 feet in within CampusCloud. And the other interesting thing is that all of these applications are being managed by CampusCloud, meaning from an application management standpoint. That means updates, upgrades, troubleshooting for everything from Active Directory to Exchange to the Student Information System and ERP system are the accountability of CampusCloud. So this is a very interesting model where They have taken a lot more than the other institutions, and presumably this is because of leadership. It's because of cost. Maybe it's because of problems at the institution related to being able to run their own infrastructure. Many reasons could lead to this scenario, but it's not unique. If you look at Our Lady of Our Lake College, they're doing exactly the same thing as Naropa, except they're a direct member of CampusCloud, and their enterprise applications are Colleague, Moodle, Active Directory, My Campus Portal, Quick Launch Single Sign-On, Citrix. All of these services are running out of CampusCloud. And the context at Our Lady of Our Lake College was that previously a hospital was their essentially IT hosting provider, and they moved that infrastructure to CampusCloud a number of years ago. So this is two examples with different enterprise applications where there's a lot of stuff being hosted in CampusCloud, but in addition, CampusCloud is responsible for essentially what's called application management. Now, on that point, application management could mean everything from a block of hours. It could mean a half-time or part-time of an FTE. It could mean a full FTE. It could mean a fixed scope, fixed cost project. So it's very flexible in terms of how to leverage CampusCloud for application management. And it's not that CampusCloud has expertise in every application, but the big ones or important ones in higher ed, there's significant expertise around. Like Active Directory, for example. So, leverage CampusCloud for application management if you need it. Otherwise, CampusCloud is really just doing hosting with really good domain context. Domain context means, for example, we know what a student information system is or an ERP system is and how it needs to relate to the directory server or Active Directory and what other applications rely on it. So when you host, for example, Colleague, it's not just hosting an application. You got to understand Unidata versus SQL. You got to understand that other applications would need to connect to it. So what would be the connection strategy? Are we going to do a VPN or IPsec tunnel? That type of thing. We would need to authenticate against the directory server. So are we going to host the directory, or are we going to connect to the directory via ADFS or opening up sort of a network connection, or putting a VPN tunnel in place? So there are really important scenarios that relate to the hosting or doing disaster recovery for these specific applications. Another really good use case, which we're not going to get into too much for this session because there will be a follow-on session for this, is disaster recovery. So an example of this that I was just at Gwynedd Mercy University for a regional face-to-face sort of a conference or birds of a feather gathering for the consortium. Gwynedd Mercy University was pushing the backup of their backup to CampusCloud as a safekeeping, right? Meaning they do backup, they've got a sort of a disk version of their backup, to disk, and they're pushing that over to CampusCloud for storage. So that's a really, really crawl before you walk example of using the cloud. This example is a lot more sophisticated. This is where Universal Technical Institute is basically running their primary site that was previously in Phoenix, Arizona. They transitioned that to Cleveland, and with dynamic DNS, they have their secondary site being transported or replicated to Denver. So this basically means Cleveland, Denver keeps their public website up. So if one fails, let's say Cleveland fails, their secondary site is up and running, and no intervention is required because of the dynamic DNS and the replication that's taking place. Now, specifically in this scenario, the hypervisor happens to be VMware, and the replication tool happens to be Veeam, for example. So again, more on this will be covered in a follow-on session that's more specific to disaster recovery. But again, as you can see, whether it's backup of backup, whether it's disaster recovery of a public website, it could be disaster recovery of an ERP system, like for example from your premise to the cloud. These are all examples of scenarios, and then of course the ones that I walked you through were all sort of new applications or old applications being transitioned to the cloud from a primary hosting standpoint. And it's really simple in terms of how we figure all this out. We just need to know things like RAM, CPU, storage. We run that against the MHAC pre-negotiated costing in terms of what has been pre-negotiated, and we put together a draft architecture because we want to make sure it's not about just the business bits. We want to make sure everyone's in sync with what this is going to look like and how it's going to function. So typically we produce a draft of the game plan and then the associated costing, which is the easiest part, that is typically based on, again, RAM, CPU, and storage that would be utilized from Campus Cloud. How we grab that is just look at the negotiated rates, and it's not that difficult to sort of put all this stuff together. Multiply 25 by 4, whatever the context is. But obviously we do that for you insofar as we define the architecture. We would then allocate the appropriate compute and storage and such, and then leverage the best costing. Campus Cloud is based on cost recovery. So it is as you can see with this example, it is based on a costing that is typically lower than Rackspace or IBM Cloud or Azure or Google Cloud or Amazon EC2. So that's important in terms of cost is a really big item, but it's not just about the commodity of the cloud. It's really about all of that domain knowledge and expertise, and in the case where you need it, application management expertise that really sort of differentiates Campus Cloud. There are some cool things that you could leverage. We see very weak secondary DNS hosting in higher ed and K-12, so you could leverage that from Campus Cloud. There's the opportunity to test through this program disaster recovery and to test monitoring so that it's an educational process, not just, okay, do you do cloud or do you not do cloud? I mean, that's sort of silly. The issue is really many institutions, as we've experienced, they just don't know where to get started or how to get started or what it's going to look like. People understand the cloud. It's not that they don't. It's not that you don't get it. Everybody sort of understands cloud. It's really a question of how does it change the operational processes, the standard operating procedures. What happens in the case of a problem? How does all of that get managed from an operational standpoint? That's important to identify and to discover. So I think these are some of the important elements as it relates to at least an introduction to this environment. One of the things that I also wanted to cover is just sort of general road mapping, kind of where are we going next. So we have a lot of that self-service capability. We've upgraded a lot of infrastructure last year. For example, we went to F5 load balancers, just as an example. Nexus was big last year, for example. So the big thing going forward now for us is, we have a lot of institutions in the consortium that don't know how to utilize Campus Cloud. So what we've been doing is releasing, individual nodes to each institution to just have sandboxes to to play around with without having to charge them, because we've already invested in the infrastructure. We have thousands and thousands of machines in terms of for utilization for sandboxes. So that's sort of one more tactical bit. But a big area is there are a lot of cloud providers that built a lot of infrastructure that's being unused. For example, like Google. So we also came across a really cool scenario where an institution may have built a premise-based whatever cloud or virtual environment, and they have a lot of unused compute. Let's say, for example, University of Minnesota. So a couple of things that we're working on is CampusCloud's ability to leverage University of Minnesota's unused compute power, so that if you want, let's say, maybe not as good of an SLA as we can provide from our central infrastructure, but let's say you have a test application, we could use University of Minnesota, for example, in the context of a degraded SLA. And I don't mean to say that University of Minnesota is not a good shop, but for example, they may not have data center operations guys available 24/7, or a huge NOC operation, or they may not have all the processes that Campus Cloud would have at the core. So that could be an example. The extension of Campus Cloud to pick up sort of cheap cloud with let's say some other provider that's looking to offload the cloud, like Google, for example. This would allow Campus Cloud to be sort of not only its own infrastructure provider, but also use other infrastructure providers where it might make sense, but still keep the the GUI and the business structure the same, so that it doesn't really matter where the infrastructure is coming from, as long as it's clear what the SLA is, and where it actually is sometimes is important for things like latency. But this is a little bit of sort of what's in the mix for 2014, which is really to extend the fabric of Campus Cloud, to federate it essentially, and that really the idea there is to continue to further decrease and commoditize the infrastructure cost as much as we can, and really focus on the usage scenarios, which is kind of the elements that I've walked you through, whether it's hosting CAS or SHIB, because we feel that this is where the value is. The value is in two major areas. One, institutions don't have a secondary data center from which to do DR. That's sort of a big value add. And in the absence of that, some institutions are doing it in another part of campus, or in a local data center, but that's not really DR, right? So it's the value add of a secondary infrastructure that you don't have to capitalize, build, and maintain, right? So that speaks to the extension of your data center without having to, again, acquire a second data center, and leverage an existing data center, let's say whatever it is, Cleveland, that's already been invested in. The second bit is really staffing, right? Everybody's got to serve the same sort of scenarios as Florida State, except, we've got to do it with, 1/10 of the staff as an example. So how does an institution extend its staff cost effectively without having to go out and hire another 30 or 40 people? Because maybe the only major difference is the number of students that are being served, but all the scope is roughly the same. So the secondary value of Campus Cloud is really the extension of core staff from a staffing standpoint, in very flexible models of how that staff is then adjuncted to your existing IT staff, right? Those are the two bits in terms of the shared services value, the shared infrastructure, and then the shared staff that, that through the appropriate alignment in architecture and in, scope of services, really is sort of where, Campus Cloud sees the value to be. especially in a world where the infrastructure is further and further being commoditized. And I'll give you an example of that commoditization. We typically, in the case of Gwen at Mercy University, we wouldn't use 15K RPM disk from NetApp for that backup scenario. It doesn't make sense, right? We use Nimble because it's much more cost effective for that scenario. But we wouldn't put production, let's say, storage on anything other than NetApp. Like we wouldn't put it on a SATA Beast or something like that because, it requires that level of quality, and it also requires that level of support and triage with NetApp support, for example, or Cisco, or any of the VMware, or any of the providers or vendors that Campus Cloud is utilizing. So that's the sort of overall introduction to Campus Cloud. And the major sort of action item is to work with Nathan as appropriate, to work with actually it's funny, there are two Nathans. There's a Nathan at MHAC and there's a Nathan with Campus Cloud. To work with Nathan, maybe to say it that way, to really get into the technical bits and the requirements of what you're trying to solve or accomplish, to produce a statement of work and to produce an architecture that can then have an associated costing associated to it, so that you can either take that to your team and say, hey, this is one option for accomplishing this mission, or we were already trying to do this, and this is sort of the game plan or architecture to address this project with. So it's really about doing one, I would say, small project first, right? So that at least if you haven't already worked with Campus Cloud, you have that success under your belt. I would not suggest, unless you have a mandate, running and doing a ERP DR, because that's sort of the big elephant. That's probably where the most value is. But you may want to get a quick win, at a low cost in first, and then come back around and do something bigger once you have that not just that trust with Campus Cloud, but once you have that operational standard operating procedure sort of back and forth tested, right? Your team knows what to do. Campus Cloud is aligned to your processes. You've tested you tested it. You know how to pass the issue back and forth. Then building upon that foundation would always be our sort of recommendation. And also, it's a good risk management way of doing it. To do it with a low-cost project first. So if there are any issues or it's not working, you can always pull out, for example, right? So that's sort of the major action item, which is work with Nathan to put together a meeting where you can sort of share what you're trying to accomplish, and we can turn something around that looks like a draft based on what we understand your requirements and your target outcomes to be. At this point, we're at the tail end. I'm going to kick it back over to Nathan and the MHAC team to see if we want to do any Q&A. If there anybody that has any questions or any other items that you'd like to have covered in the next few minutes before we wrap. Can I pass it over?
Sure, certainly.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peach. That was some great examples of how institutions are utilizing Campus Cloud. Here we have Campus EAI's Nathan Ram's contact information. I do want to note that our contract that we have posted on the website includes an ordering document to help assist with the quote process. I don't see any questions. I do want to note that we have recorded this webinar and we'll post it shortly after today's presentation so you can reference it in the future and share it with your colleagues. We appreciate the attendance today. And at the close of the webinar, you'll be given a link to a survey. So if you could please complete that for us, that would be very helpful. Thank you, and have a great rest of the week.
Bye.